Antony Blinken, and that is a brief chat with reporters there on the heels of an unannounced visit. He was coming from a secure location within Baghdad, having met with the Iraqi prime minister today. Among the many topics he discussed was telling the Iraqi prime minister there shall be no harm to come to any U.S. personnel, military personnel in the region, or there will be a price to pay for that. He also extended that to American citizens in the region as well. But let's go right now back to Congressman Khanna, and I welcome you back to this. I'm sure you were hearing the Secretary of State. Tell me what you took away from that brief Q&A that he offered.
I think the Secretary is doing his best to make sure that we're protecting Americans. He's doing his best to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. He recognizes, of course, Israel's right to go after the Hamas perpetrators who committed the atrocity on October 7th and the need to free hostages. But I think he is really mindful of the civilian casualties and working to see how we can reduce that. And I also believe it was very important for him to say that Palestinian aspirations, Palestinian rights will be at the heart of the future. President Obama this weekend talked about the need for peace and need to deal with the occupation and to have a just peace. And it was good to hear the Secretary talk about Palestinian voices being heard.
Yeah, he's absolutely the literal example of shuttle diplomacy right now and going from place to place. In fact, sir, as you know, in the West Bank today, he rebuffed calls from President Mahmoud Abbas and other Arab leaders for an immediate ceasefire. So the State Department says that Blinken instead has made it very clear that Palestinians must not be forcibly displaced and renewed his call for a humanitarian pause. So the question to you is the Biden administration's diplomatic approach working?
Alex, they are doing everything possible to get it to work, but we need, of course, the humanitarian aid to get in. And I do think that they're making progress towards that. I also believe that behind the scenes, they are making it clear that while you can go after the Hamas terrorists and have a duty to go after the Hamas terrorists, and you have to free the hostages, that we have to have Israel needs operational patience, that they have to be mindful of bombings of schools, of refugee camps, of hospitals, and can't be engaged in something where just going after a few terrorists, you have many civilian casualties. And I do believe the administration is making that clear through this kind of shuttle diplomacy.
You saw the tens of thousands protesting in the nation's capital and other world cities yesterday, all calling for a ceasefire. 18, sir, of your Democratic colleagues, they are co-sponsoring a resolution calling for that immediate ceasefire, but you are not among them. In fact, interesting story that we read about your political director for your re-election campaign, whom you recently hired, resigned over his concern that you were not going far enough in your calls for de-escalation. So why not call for a ceasefire? Is a humanitarian pause enough? And by the way, you in your position, you are in very good company. There are a lot of people feeling the way you do. But what's it about?
It's a very, very difficult situation, but I do believe that the people, Hamas terrorists who committed the act on October 7th, they need to be brought to justice, and Israel has a right to do that. And I also believe that the hostages have to be freed, and that's why I have not gotten on a ceasefire. But I have called for both a humanitarian pause and getting food and water, fuel into Gaza, and I have also said that the bombings should not be in schools, in hospitals, in refugee camps, in dense population areas, even though Hamas uses civilians as human shields, even though it's a very complex issue, there cannot be the killing of hundreds of civilians just to get a few Hamas terrorists. And that, in my view, can help move us forward where we can then have diplomacy and a just peace.
One of the most outspoken of the progressives calling for a ceasefire is Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian American in Congress. She released this video on Friday. Let's look at this together.
We will remember in 2024.
So those last few frames which said Joe Biden supported the genocide of the Palestinian people, the American people will not forget. What do you make of her pressure campaign on the president?
Well, I would say to Representative Tlaib, look at the option. I mean, you have Donald Trump talking about not allowing Palestinians in America to stay in America, and some of the Republicans talking about that. You have them talking about a Muslim ban. If you have critiques of the administration's policy, obviously I think that the administration should engage with those who have called for the ceasefire and should have dialogue with them. But in my view, the alternative of handing the presidency to Donald Trump is not only disastrous for America, not only disastrous for progressives in the Muslim American community, it's disastrous for the world.
Well, let me show you something that may make you feel even less settled if you're not familiar with it. We're going to show you a New York Times Siena poll that is out today in which Donald Trump leads Biden in 5 critical states, in Nevada by 10 points, Georgia by 6, Arizona and Michigan by 5. How concerned are you about that?
Alex, I'm concerned. I mean, anyone looking at those polls would be concerned. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? The issue is not just to say that what is the White House going to do. This is a moment for citizenship, Alex. Our democracy, the question of whether we're going to be a cohesive multiracial democracy is on the ballot. And all of us as citizens need to do what we can to help succeed and make sure that the president wins. And I believe if we do that, if we mobilize, we can win. We can get the economic message out. We can get the choice out. But what I would say to people complaining and criticizing the White House is, what are you doing? What are you doing to win? That's how Obama won. That movements aren't just about the president. They're about what we as citizens have a responsibility to do. This should be a wake-up call to all of us.
So the word cohesive brings me to this question. Your fellow Congressman, Democrat Dean Phillips, launched a campaign for president. And then we see Gavin Newsom, who says he's not going to run, but recently meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and has also been accused of running a shadow campaign. Do the Democrats need an alternative to Biden, or is it a mistake to challenge him and not keep the Democratic Party under a cohesive blanket, if you will?
Well, I support strongly the president. I think he's the strongest candidate to be able to beat Donald Trump. We have a great story to tell on the American Rescue Plan, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and all of the infrastructure bill, all the things he has delivered for the American people. Look, people have a right to run campaigns, and they have a right to fly around the world. I'm not going to tell other people what they can or cannot do. They're American citizens. But I will say this. If you care about us winning in 2024, deal in the real world. Joe Biden is going to be the nominee. What are we doing to help make him the strongest possible candidate for re-election?
Let me get into one more situation, the politics on the Hill there, because under the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, the House has approved a $14 billion aid package to Israel, and it was tied with nearly equal cuts to the IRS. It does not include any funding aid to Ukraine. It is said to be DOA in the Senate, and Biden says he's going to veto it if it gets through to him. So what happens now?
Well, look how irresponsible it is what Mike Johnson did. He tied Israel aid with basically giving tax breaks to the wealthy and cutting the enforcement arm of the IRS that collects tax revenue. That was deeply cynical, and he actually is jeopardizing our relationship with an ally. He also zeroed out, by the way, any aid, any humanitarian aid for the people in Gaza. Totally uncompassionate. I don't see how he reconciles that with his own faith, with his own talking about scripture, to not have any food, water, aid into Gaza. So I believe that now it depends on Senator Schumer and responsible leadership in the Senate to pass something and then send it to the House, and for the House then to pass what the bipartisan Senate bill will be.
Okay, California Congressman Khanna, lucky me to get a little extra time with you. Thank you for staying with us, sir, through the brief news conference there we had with Antony Blinken. Appreciate your time.